Hey everyone, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to take a look into how we can create a screen fade for the Oculus Quest 2 or mobile devices in general. So in the past, if you want to do screen fade using the camera blueprints, you would typically have to use Mobile HDR, but that's not available on the Quest 2 or the VR template kind of situation as it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to set up a screen fade that you can control the color of and the length. And you can also trigger it from different actors in the scene. So in this case, I've got this example set up where we can fire it from our gun. So if we pick up our gun and we fire it, it'll actually change the color to red and then it stops. So at the end of that stop, when it resets back, you would typically have whatever your outcome of that screen fade is going to be. So we're going to start by opening up a new project or a new template, which I've already got set up. So we're going to have screen fade example. And this is just a blank template. So if you want to download this, make sure to head over to Patreon. You'll be able to download this file and check it out so you can investigate and have a look how it's going. And the first thing we're going to do is we might as well create a new folder. And we're going to call this screen fade because there's a couple of things we're going to have to create. So screen fade, and we need to create 3 things in here. The first thing we're going to create is a material. We're going to call this m_screen fade. Makes sense. Then we're going to create a blueprint interface. So blueprint interface. This is actually going to be what we use to control and fire the fade. So blueprint interface, BPI, and then screen fade. If you have an interface set up for your player that's like a global thing, you could just easily put these functions in there. It's not gonna change anything. We just need a way to access this information from our player. So we've got screen fade interface. And then we want a blueprint class actor. And then we're going to call this BP_screen fade sphere. Okay, so we might as well set up our material first. So we're going to open this up, rejig it around. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set shading model to unlit. And we also want to search for depth. And what we're going to do is we're going to disable depth test. We're going to take that to true, or it might not let us because I forgot to set our blend mode to translucent, which we also need. So now we can go and disable depth. And what we want is we're going to set a color and an opacity. So we're going to hold 3 on the keyboard. So we've got our color, and I've just crashed Unreal. So let's close without sending. So I think they get enough of those. And then I'm going to open it back up. And the reason that crashed is because I forgot to change my project settings from Windows default RHI to DirectX 11. So I'll leave that in. At least it might help someone. And I'll do a separate video on that as well. So sorry for that, but once this boots back up, we should be able to actually make that material. So let's go back to our screen fade, and we've got to redo all of that again. So we want a material, m_screen fade. Then we want our blueprint interface, BPI_screen fade. And then we want our actor, so blueprint class actor, BP_screen fade. Might as well keep it all the same. So if we do a save all, so we don't lose any of that again, we'll do our material. And again, it's going to be set our blend mode to translucent, shading model to unlit because we don't need it to have shading. And then we want to search for depth, and we're going to do disable depth test. We're going to hit apply and save just to make sure it doesn't crash again. But this time we should actually be able to hold 3, click, and then it won't crash. Cool. So we connect that to a emissive, and we can right click and we can convert this parameter to screen fade color like so. And then we're going to press 1 on the keyboard. So we've got a constant value, and we're going to set our opacity to a value of 1. We might as well have it so we can see it. So material expression constant value 1. So we got a solid black color. We're going to hit apply, and then we can close this window down. That's it for the material, although we might actually have to go back in there so we can get the name of it or the variables. And I realized I didn't name our constant. So convert to parameter, we want to right click, convert to parameter, and we're going to call this opacity because we're going to do this through a dynamic material. So hit apply and save. And now we can actually set up our blueprint. So we're going to open our blueprint, and all we actually need in here is to add a sphere component. So we're going to go to add sphere. With that selected, we want to apply our material. So we're going to search for screen fade. And I've just realized because our material or our sphere doesn't have any back faces, we need to also set 2-sided. Okay, it's been a long day. So open our material, make sure it's set to 2-sided, hit apply. And now if we're inside our sphere, we can't actually see out of it. It's just black, which is exactly what we're after. We've set scale as 0, set our sphere as a size of 1. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select our BP screen fade self. And we're just going to start with tick enabled. We'll set that to false. We don't need it to tick. It's fine. Save. And that's it for our blueprint. So we've got our material, which has two parameters, which is a color. So we've got our color called screen fade color, and then our opacity, which is opacity value 1. So that's all we need for both of these. So let's close those down. And now for our screen fade, we want to open this up and we're going to create two custom functions. So the first one is going to be fade to scene, and the second will be fade to color. I just found this is the easiest way to remember them. And because we want to change the color of our screen fade, or we might want to have control over it, what we're going to do is we're going to set these to have a variable for linear color. So we bring it up here, we can go to inputs, I'm going to select the plus, and at the minute mine's set to Boolean, but we're going to set this to linear color, which is the third one down, so linear color, and we're going to call this fade color. And we do the exact same thing for our fade to color. So fade to color. And you might be wondering why we need our fade to scene to have one. That's because we've still got a color in there that we can control. So typically they will be the same color, and in this case it'll be black. But we can actually have a look at changing that. So if you've got different effects or different ends to levels, that kind of thing, you could then use different colors and set that in your blueprints from wherever they are. So be a bit more custom. And you can also do some time stuff in here as well. So you can set the scale of the timeline, which we'll be doing. But we won't be looking at that. It's pretty easy to add. So compile save. That's it for our screen fade. And now we can actually set up our code. So all of the code that we're going to be doing is going to take place inside of our VR pawn. So VR template, and then blueprints, and we want to open up our VR pawn. So the trick here is to find an empty space that's reasonable. So I like to go up here for this. And we're going to actually spawn this sphere in. We're not going to add it as a component. If we add it to a component, we always have a transparent sphere that will exist in front of us. And that can, if you've got loads of issues with performance, they can't really help. And if you've got transparency in the scene, you're kind of looking through two different layers of transparency. So it's not very good to use in general or to have exist permanently. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to class settings. We're going to go to implement interfaces, and we're going to add our BPI screen fade. So right here, I'm going to select that and then hit compile so we can access the events we've created. And we're going to right click and we're going to do event and then search fade. And now we've got fade to color and then we've got fade to scene. So event, fade to scene, and we have both of these. What we're going to do is we're just going to work on one of these at a time because we can copy pretty much the entire lot of code to the bottom one and then change a couple of things to make it a bit easier. So I'm going to change these around, put them in order that we actually have them in. So when the game starts, we'd fade to the scene, and then we can have fade to color fire from somewhere else. So there's essentially two parts to this code. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to spawn a sphere around our player's head. So the BP screen fade sphere that we created, we're going to spawn that on our camera as a child component, which we can then access information from it to create a dynamic material instance. So if we start by searching for spawn actor from class, we'll make some room. We're going to search for our screen fade. So we've got BP screen fade. Collision handling override, we're going to set this to always spawn, ignore collisions. And now we set up our spawn transform. So we could work from the spawn transform and work backwards, but we're going to start from the camera itself. So we're going to do right click and we're going to do get player camera manager. So this means we don't have to have a reference directly to our camera. It'll get anything. So if you're working on another platform or different headset like blueprint interface, you can just add this to that and it should work as well. So now we've got our get player camera manager. We want to get our root. So we're going to get root component and then we can get world transform, if I spell it correctly, and we can connect that to our transform. The reason we're doing the root component is because we want our actual camera, and it'll get the default scene root, but it'll be fine. So it'll work how we want it. And we're going to use this to attach it to our component. We're going to drag off and do attach actor to component. Because what we're doing is we're spawning an actor here, so we want to get our player camera component. So we're going to attach our actor to the camera component itself. So hook that up like so. And then I change these to the location rule specifically to snap to target. So snap to target, snap to target. And we don't have a socket name, so we don't need to worry about that. Now what we want to do is create our dynamic material reference. And to do that, we need our sphere from our blueprint because that contains our material that we're going to use or try to modify. So we're going to drag off our return value and we're going to search for sphere. So get sphere. If you change the name of your sphere, you'll have to search for that name. Otherwise it might not show up. But if you just search get, it should show you this. And from this, we want to drag off and create dynamic material instance. So we can see it right here. If we hit enter, we can connect that up to our attach actor component. So it's all going in order that we're going to fire it from. So our source material actually exists in our sphere. So rather than going through and getting that manually, we can actually search for it here. So if you change it around, it's a little bit more controlled on your end. So we'll drag off the sphere and we'll do get material, and we want the one on the top. So get material, element index 0. If you have your screen fade on a different element, you'll have to change that. And if you're not too sure what an element is, if we open up the screen fade blueprint, dock that window, it is the material that it's attached off. So element 0, and that's what we're saying. We're going to say that this sphere has a material in element 0, and that's the one we want to control. So we got that here, and then we can just plug that into our source material. And you can also see you've got the control of changing the index here as well. So that can be as it is. And now we're going to change our first value, which is our color. So when we start this and we spawn our sphere, we immediately want to set our fade color. We don't want to do it after our timeline with the opacity, otherwise it'll just look weird. So we're going to get our return value from our create dynamic material instance, and we'll do set vector parameter value. Basically, a vector is a combination of different inputs. So if I was to split the value pin, we'd see it's got each individual one. And our material has 4 values, or our base color does. So this is what we're going to control. So let's recombine the struct pin. And that value for the color, we can literally just drag and plug into our fade color, because we're going to control it manually from there. And then our parameter name. So this is the name that our material is going to be changing. So in this case, it is our screen fade color. So I can copy that and then go back to our VR pawn and paste this in. And now what this will do is it will create a dynamic material instance and it will place it in our material slot. And then it will get the fade color that we've assigned to our function and change the value here. That's one thing to mention, is if you want to change the fade color permanently, so it's the same throughout, you can actually open up the interface and change the value there. So if I open up the screen fade interface, fade to scene, we can drop down the fade color, and you can see here we've got default value. So you can just change it there. So if you wanted it to permanently be red, you can have it like that. So you don't have to keep going back and setting it, which is just a little bit easier from different places. And then the interface itself, if you change this color somewhere else, it'll override that. So you've still got the control over it. Cool. So now we have our vector parameter all set. We're going to create our timeline. We could do this with a function and then have a custom event which fires, but we don't really need that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag off here and I'm going to do a timeline, and we shall call it screen fade to color. I think that is the right one. Or is it scene? It's scene. It's always the other one. Fade to scene, and we'll keep this as it is. And what we want to do is we actually want to change this to reverse from end. We're just going to copy this node later, so it makes it a little bit easier. And it also means you don't have to think about it backwards. So we could just say, so we don't have to think about it backwards, otherwise we'd have to do the timeline all different ways. So in this case, we want our fade to go from 0 to 1. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because our parameter is already set to a value of 1. So when it starts, the material is already created and it'll be a value of 1. We're going to change that from 0 to 1. This will make more sense if you play around with it a little bit, but we'll close that window, and that one, we don't need them anymore. So back in our VR pawn, what we're going to do is we're going to change our parameter. So this time, instead of a set vector parameter, we want to set scalar parameter. So we're going to drag off, set scalar parameter value, and we're going to plug this into update. So as this timeline ticks through, it's going to update this value for us. And we've got no way to add in our float value yet, but we can set our parameter name to opacity, which, if I remember correctly, that is what we called it. Yep, no harm in double checking. And now we can set up our timeline. So we're going to start by opening it up and set a track. And we just want a float track. And I find it best to change the length to a value of 1. A screen fade on Quest or mobile, a value of 1 is normally pretty nice, but you can extend this, and I'll show you how in a minute. So in here, we're going to right click, we're going to add key to curve, set this to a value of 0 and 0, and then we're going to right click again and set this to a value of 1 and 1. So it takes up the entire length of our curve. And now if we want to actually have this so it smooths out, you could actually have this as auto, and then you can control the curvature of the timeline itself. With a screen fade though, you normally go from 0 to 1, but let's keep it like this. Looks a little bit nicer. Now we have this, we can go to our event graph again, And you'll see that we actually have our new track for our fade value, and we want to set that to here. So when we create it, our value will be set at 0, and then it'll fade in. But because we have it from reverse from end, it'll actually go backwards. So it'll start at a value of 1, which is our solid color, and then it'll fade to transparent. It's just a bit easier to get the curve going, so you don't have to flip these around and work backwards. So with that one done, we could actually test this by going to our event begin play and firing fade to scene. So we want to right click, fade to scene, and we want message. Let's compile. And then we're going to right click, do fade to scene. And we got our BPI screen fade to scene. And we're going to plug that in after our execute command. So now if we hit compile and we jump over to the VR template, if we were to simulate, nothing will happen. It's because our player or our camera isn't actually creating anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the play button, or we're going to change to VR preview, and you'll see it's very quick, but it does fade in. And it's happening really quick because we immediately start and say, do this thing. So what we can do is if we want to start and we want to hang it for a second, so it hangs on the color, we can open up our VR pawn and then open up our timeline. And let's say we change this to 1.5, if it lets me. Then we get this line. So we say for half a second, we're going to be on a value of 1, and then it will change and gradually fade in. So if I compile now, VR template, and then we press play, you'll see it hangs for half a second and then fades in. The issue with this now is we don't actually have our blueprint being destroyed. So it still exists. So in our VR pawn, we're going to go to our event graph, and we want to work from the finished tab. So when our screen fade finishes, we're going to tell it to do something. So what we want to do now is actually destroy our sphere once it's finished. From our finish is we could get a delay, and then we say wait for 1.5 seconds, and then on complete, we could say destroy actor, and target, we can set it to our return value for our spawn actor. Okay, so back after the crash, and if we hit play again, it actually works. So we fade into the scene. And if you remember I was saying about the fade color, you can actually check the color here. So we say if we want it to be red, we can then change the box from the fire. And then when we hit it, it actually changes the color of our screen fade as well. So I'm just going to keep these as black, a bit easier to understand. And now what we can do is we can actually comment our fade to scene. So C, fade to scene. And from here, we're going to have to do a whole bunch of other things. But what we need to do is we need to fade to black, or fade to color is the next one. So because mine crashed, I didn't have the other node back in here. So I'm going to right click and do event, fade to color. So we got this. And it's literally just a case of we select everything that we've already created, do Control C, Control V, and then we plug in our event to our spawn actor. Fade color drags all the way along to our set vector parameter color. And from our timeline, this will actually be a new timeline. So if we scroll down, we'll see in our components, we now have 2. I'm going to rename the first one because mine broke, so fade to scene. And then I'm going to right click our new one, rename fade to color. So we shouldn't actually have to touch much of this. You can see it's exactly the same. It goes in the same order. We just want to change from play to start. That's literally it. And now if we press play, nothing will happen because we haven't got it in there. Realize, but what we want to do is we want to fire this from something else, an event. I don't have anything set up, but we do have a gun. And that is a good place to show how we can fire this from inside of our player. So let's do a comment, fade to color, have this moved up. And what we want to do now is fire this from anywhere. And to do that is really easy. This case, I'll be using get player pawn as a reference. But if you followed along to the smooth locomotion tutorial or anything like that, your parent class will be different. So you need to take in mind your parent class, and then we can use that. In this case, it's pawn. For that tutorial, we change it to character. So you would just use that instead. So better example is if we right click our gun asset and we open it up, we've got our event trigger pressed. We want to fade to color when we pull the trigger. So we're going to right click and we'll do get player pawn. And like I said, this case is get player pawn because our VR character, as parent class, is pawn. If it was the character, you would do get player character, and you could use that instead. But in this case, we can do drag off and do fade to color, and then we can plug this in. So now when we pull the trigger, we fade out to that color. So we can bring it in, pop the headset on. So we fade into the color, and then when we pick up the gun and we pull the trigger, we fade out to black. You say it only lasts so long, that's because of our delay as we destroy it afterwards. So from here, you could then actually have your code fire something else. Could be a load level or anything along them lines. You would just do a branch. So you could have all your code set up. You would have a has faded out. So you could do a variable, call this bool, and we'll name this has faded to color question mark. And then we can bring this in and we do a set. So we can say delay, or actually we'll do that after. So we do our finished, we have it set to true. And now let's say you've got another instance, so we do a custom blueprint. This won't actually fire, but you could say load level, have a branch, yeah, and then you say on true, open the level if fade is completed, that kind of thing. Or you can even have this fire different things, have another event. So it's kind of up to you how you want to play with it and how you want to go with it. But for what this is, that's pretty much it. So we have a screen fade material, which has a color and opacity parameters set to translucent and unlit with two-sided and depth disabled, or depth test. Which one is it? Depth. Disable depth test set to true. Then we have a blueprint, which contains a sphere mesh set with the material set to screen fade. And our blueprint has tick disabled. Then we have a blueprint interface, which is where we can control it from. So fade to scene and then fade to color. You could even do a has fade to scene complete, and then you could have that fire other things. So you have it play at the end. So you say has fade complete, true. Then you can actually have it tell different things to do it. But I'm sure you guys can figure that out. We're gonna hit compile and save, and then we'll hit play. So we fade in and then we can fade back out. So if anybody wants access to this file, so you can actually dive in, have a look at it, investigate a little bit more, then feel free to head over to the Patreon. It'll be available through there. And while we're talking about Patreon, big thank you to everyone over there for sticking around. I know it's been a little while since we've had a tutorial come out, but it means a lot and it's now lets me actually get back into this. And yeah, so here's all the awesome Patreons. They should be appearing now. Stay safe and I'll see you then. Bye.